Welcome to Bible Stories for Sleep. The scripture tells us, He grants sleep to those He loves. Tonight, let that promise carry you as we walk together through the story of Esther. If these stories bring you peace, tap subscribe so a new story is always waiting for you. Now release the weight of the day, close your eyes, and let the Word be your rest. The last embers of the day were softly cooling, painting the vast Persian sky in hues of deep violet and fading rose, as a gentle breeze, carrying the faint scent of distant spices and dry earth, stirred the leaves of the date palms in the royal gardens of Susa. The air, still holding the day's warmth, was beginning to yield to the cool embrace of the approaching night, and the distant, rhythmic chirping of crickets began to weave itself into the quiet hum of the sprawling city. Shadows lengthened, stretching across the sun-baked courtyards and the intricate carvings of the palace walls, softening their sharp edges, inviting a sense of peaceful repose as the first stars began to prickle through the deepening twilight. It was in this ancient land, under the expansive canopy of the Achaemenid Empire, that the story of Esther began, unfolding slowly, like the unfurling of a delicate scroll in the quiet lamplight. The empire itself was a colossal tapestry woven from many peoples and tongues, stretching from the sun-drenched shores of India to the fertile plains of Ethiopia, a dominion so vast that its very mention evoked images of unimaginable wealth and power. At its heart lay Susa, one of its four magnificent capitals, a city steeped in history, its foundations reaching back thousands of years, long before the Persian kings had chosen it as a jewel in their crown. Here, amidst the grandeur of palaces adorned with glazed bricks depicting winged bulls and archers, lived King Ahasuerus, a monarch whose word was law across 127 provinces. In the third year of his reign, a time when the empire was perhaps settling into a period of relative peace after earlier campaigns, King Ahasuerus decided to host a grand feast, a celebration of such immense scale and duration that its memory would linger for years in the minds of those who witnessed it. This was not merely a banquet, it was a demonstration of power, a lavish display of the boundless riches and the glorious majesty of his kingdom. For 180 days, 6 long months, the noblemen, the princes, and the military leaders from every corner of his vast realm were invited to partake in this continuous spectacle. Imagine the sheer logistics, the constant flow of dignitaries arriving and departing, the endless preparations, the bustling kitchens, the shimmering silks, and the glint of gold under the Persian sun. The air during these months would have been thick with the scent of roasting meats, exotic perfumes, and the sweet, heavy aroma of fermented grapes, mingled with the murmur of 1,000 conversations in a multitude of languages. As these 6 months drew to a close, and perhaps as a final, grand flourish, the king then prepared another feast, this one for all the people who were present in the citadel of Susa, from the greatest to the least. This second feast lasted for 7 days, a week of continuous indulgence held within the king's own palace garden, a place of exquisite beauty and meticulous design. The garden itself was a marvel, an oasis of carefully cultivated beauty amidst the arid landscape. Picture the vibrant hues of flowering shrubs, the cool, dark green of cypress trees, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the soft breeze. The ground was paved with a mosaic of white, green, and blue marble, inlaid with lustrous mother-of-pearl, shimmering underfoot like a scattered collection of jewels. Canopies of fine white and blue linen, perhaps embroidered with gold and silver threads, were stretched overhead, providing shade from the relentless sun, their corners held by cords of purple and white, tethered to silver rings and pillars of polished marble. The air would have been cooler beneath these awnings, a welcome respite from the heat, and the light filtering through the fabric would have cast a soft, diffused glow over the gathering. Guests reclined on couches of gold and silver, their surfaces perhaps intricately carved or inlaid, brought out into the open air for this special occasion. The vessels from which they drank were not mere cups, but golden goblets, each one unique in its design, reflecting the light with a warm, rich gleam. And the wine, oh, the royal wine, flowed freely, in abundance, poured out from these precious vessels, its quality befitting the king's own generous hand. It was served without restraint, yet with a quiet understanding that no one was compelled to drink more than they desired, a subtle nod to the king's thoughtful hospitality. At the same time, within the royal palace itself, Queen Vashti, the king's own consort, was hosting her own feast for the women. While the men reveled in the garden, the women of the court, the noble ladies, and perhaps the wives of the dignitaries, gathered in a more intimate setting, away from the boisterous male company. Imagine the soft rustle of their silk garments, the delicate clinking of their jewelry, the gentle laughter and quiet conversations that would have filled the women's quarters, perhaps scented with rosewater and jasmine. On the 7th day of the king's feast, as the wine had loosened tongues and spirits had soared, King Ahasuerus, his heart merry with wine, decided upon a certain course of action. He summoned 7 of his most trusted eunuchs, men who served directly in his presence and carried out his personal commands: Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carkas. These men were dispatched with a specific instruction to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown. The king's intention was for her to display her beauty to the assembled princes and people, for she was indeed a woman of striking appearance. The eunuchs, accustomed to carrying out the king's every whim without question, made their way to the queen's quarters and conveyed the royal command. However, Queen Vashti, for reasons that were her own, refused to come. Her decision, delivered perhaps with quiet dignity, or perhaps with a defiant firmness, sent a ripple of shock through the royal court. To refuse a direct command from the king, especially in such a public and festive setting, was an act of profound insubordination, a challenge to his absolute authority that was almost unheard of in the rigid hierarchy of the Persian court. When the eunuchs returned with the queen's refusal, the king's merriment quickly evaporated, replaced by a surge of royal fury. His anger burned within him, a dangerous fire that threatened to consume all in its path. He was accustomed to unquestioning obedience, and this public defiance, in front of all his nobles and guests, was an unbearable affront. In his distress and anger, he turned to his wise men, those who understood the laws and customs of the kingdom, men who were learned in ancient traditions and precedents. These were the legal experts, the interpreters of the empire's vast and complex body of laws, men whose counsel was sought in matters of grave importance. He addressed them, his voice perhaps tight with suppressed rage, asking for their judgment, according to the law. What is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not obeyed the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? The question hung heavy in the opulent air, laden with the weight of royal displeasure and the potential for severe consequences. The wise men, no doubt exchanging uneasy glances, understood the gravity of the situation. This was not merely a domestic dispute, it was a matter of state, a challenge to the very fabric of royal authority. Among these wise men was Memucan, who stepped forward to offer his counsel, his voice measured and grave. He spoke not just of the queen's transgression against the king, but of its wider implications, its potential to destabilize the social order. Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, he declared, his words echoing in the hushed chamber, but also all the princes and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. He explained his reasoning, painting a vivid picture of the potential fallout. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, he continued, his gaze perhaps sweeping across the faces of the other counselors, causing them to despise their husbands in their eyes, when they report, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. Memucan foresaw a dangerous precedent being set, a ripple effect that could undermine the authority of every husband in the empire. He imagined wives across the 127 provinces hearing of Vashti's defiance and, emboldened by her example, beginning to question their own husbands' commands. This, in the patriarchal society of ancient Persia, was a terrifying prospect, a threat to the established order that could not be tolerated. Therefore, Memucan proposed a solution, a decisive action to prevent such a societal unraveling. If it pleases the king, he suggested, his voice firm, let a royal decree be issued by him and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. Furthermore, he advised, let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. This was a bold and irreversible step, stripping Vashti not only of her queenship but also of any future access to the king's presence. To reinforce this decree and ensure its widespread impact, Memucan added another layer to his proposal. When the king's decree which he will make is heard throughout all his kingdom, great as it is, then all women will give honor to their husbands, from the greatest to the least. The logic was clear, a swift and severe punishment for the queen would serve as a powerful deterrent, a stark reminder to all women of the consequences of disobedience, thereby reinforcing the hierarchical structure of the family unit throughout the empire. The king and the princes found Memucan's counsel to be sound and agreeable. The words resonated with their own anxieties about maintaining order and authority. The advice pleased the king, and he acted upon it without delay. Letters were immediately dispatched, read in the script of each province and in the language of each people, sent to all the king's provinces. These royal edicts, sealed with the king's own signet ring, carried the full weight of imperial authority. The message was clear and unequivocal, that every man should be master in his own house, and that he should speak according to the language of his own people. This final clause, perhaps, was a subtle way of ensuring that the decree was not only understood but also enforced within the cultural context of each diverse region, preventing any misinterpretation or local resistance. After these events, when the initial heat of King Ahasuerus's anger had begun to cool, and the memory of Vashti's defiance lingered like a fading echo, the king began to remember Vashti, and what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Perhaps in the quiet solitude of his chambers, away from the clamor of the court and the influence of his advisers, a flicker of regret or a pang of loneliness stirred within him. The grand feast was over, the guests had dispersed, and the palace, though still bustling, might have felt a little emptier without the queen. His personal attendants, ever watchful of the king's moods and desires, noticed this shift. They approached him with a new suggestion, a way to fill the void left by Vashti and to perhaps lift the king's spirits. "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king," they proposed, their voices soft and deferential. The idea was to gather all the most beautiful young women from across the vast empire, bringing them to the citadel of Susa, to the women's quarters, under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women. There, they would undergo a period of purification and beautification, a meticulous preparation for their eventual presentation to the king. "And let the young woman who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti," they concluded, offering a practical and appealing solution to the king's predicament. This proposal found favor with the king, and he commanded that it be carried out. Now, in the citadel of Susa, there lived a certain Jewish man whose name was Mordecai, the son of Joai, the son of Shammai, the son of Kish, from the tribe of Benjamin. His ancestors, along with many others from Jerusalem, had been carried away into exile by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, during the reign of Jeconiah, king of Judah. Mordecai was not merely a resident of Susa, he held a position of some importance, serving at the king's gate, a place where official business was conducted, where news was exchanged, and where the pulse of the city could be felt. His presence there suggests a degree of trust and integration into the Persian administration, despite his Jewish heritage. Mordecai had a young cousin, a girl named Hadassah, which in Hebrew means myrtle, a delicate and fragrant plant. She was an orphan, for she had neither father nor mother. Mordecai had taken her under his wing, adopting her as his own daughter, raising her with care and affection. Hadassah was a young woman of remarkable beauty, possessing a graceful bearing and a pleasing countenance that drew the eye. It was this Hadassah, whom Mordecai had reared, who would later become known by her Persian name, Esther, a name perhaps derived from the Persian word for star. The shift in names, from the Hebrew myrtle to the Persian star, subtly hints at her dual identity and the journey she was about to embark upon, moving from the quiet life of a Jewish orphan to the dazzling, yet perilous, world of the Persian court. When the king's command and his decree were proclaimed throughout the provinces, and many young women were gathered to the citadel of Susa, brought under the care of Hegai, Esther too was taken to the king's palace. She was placed under the watchful eye of Hegai, the keeper of the women, who was tasked with overseeing their preparation. Imagine the scene, a multitude of young women, each beautiful in her own way, drawn from diverse backgrounds and cultures across the vast empire, all converging on the opulent palace. The air in the women's quarters would have been a mix of apprehension and excitement, the rustle of silk, the murmur of different languages, the scent of exotic oils and perfumes. Esther found favor in Hegai's eyes, and she quickly gained his approval. He was impressed by her demeanor, her quiet grace, and perhaps her intelligence. He wasted no time in providing her with the necessary provisions for her beautification, ensuring she received her allotted portions of food, and assigning her 7 specially chosen maids from the king's palace to attend to her needs. Furthermore, he moved her and her maids to the best place within the women's quarters, a subtle but significant sign of his preference and the special attention she was receiving. During this time, Esther kept her Jewish identity a secret, as Mordecai had strictly instructed her not to reveal her people or her kindred. This was a wise precaution in a foreign court, where ethnic and religious differences could sometimes lead to prejudice or danger. Her true background remained a hidden facet of her identity, carefully guarded beneath her outward composure. Every single day, Mordecai would walk back and forth in front of the court of the women's quarters. He did this not out of idle curiosity, but with a deep concern for Esther's well-being. He wanted to know how she was faring, to gather any news about her, to ensure she was safe and comfortable in this strange and demanding environment. His daily presence, a quiet, reassuring ritual, was a lifeline for Esther, a subtle connection to her past and her family amidst the grandeur and uncertainty of the palace. The period of purification for each young woman was extensive, lasting for 12 months, a full year of meticulous preparation. This lengthy process was divided into 2 distinct phases. 6 months were dedicated to treatments with oil of myrrh, a fragrant resin known for its purifying and softening properties, used to cleanse and rejuvenate the skin. The next 6 months were spent with sweet spices and other cosmetics, perhaps fragrant powders, aromatic lotions, and delicate perfumes, all designed to enhance their natural beauty and prepare them for their presentation to the king. This was a slow, deliberate transformation, a ritual of beautification that was both physical and perhaps, in its own way, psychological, preparing them for the immense honor and pressure of potentially becoming queen. When the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after she had completed her 12 months of preparation according to the regulations for the women, she was allowed to take with her whatever she desired from the women's quarters to the king's palace. This might have included special garments, jewelry, or personal adornments that she felt would enhance her appearance or comfort. In the evening, she would go into the king's presence, and in the morning, she would return to another part of the women's quarters, to the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. These women would not return to the king unless he specifically desired her and she was summoned by name. This detail highlights the vast number of women involved and the king's ultimate discretion in choosing his companions, and eventually, his queen. When it was Esther's turn to go into the king, she asked for nothing beyond what Hegai, the king's eunuch, the keeper of the women, advised her to take. This was a testament to her quiet wisdom and her trust in Hegai's experience. She understood that Hegai, with his intimate knowledge of the king's preferences and the customs of the court, was best positioned to guide her. Her humility and willingness to follow expert counsel likely impressed Hegai even further. And so, Esther, guided by Hegai's advice, went into the king. As she entered the royal presence, Esther won the admiration of everyone who saw her. There was something about her, a combination of her innate beauty, her gentle demeanor, and perhaps the quiet confidence instilled by Hegai's guidance, that made her stand out. She did not need to adorn herself with excessive jewels or elaborate garments. Her natural grace and charm were more than enough. Esther was brought to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevath, in the 7th year of his reign. The air would have been cool, perhaps a crispness in the night air hinting at the winter season, a contrast to the long, hot months of the initial feast. The palace would have been lit by countless oil lamps, their soft, flickering glow casting long shadows and illuminating the rich tapestries and gilded decorations. The king was drawn to Esther more than to any of the other women. Her presence seemed to calm and captivate him in a way that none of the others had. He found her more pleasing and more captivating than all the virgins who had been presented to him. His affection for her grew quickly, blossoming into a deep fondness. And so, he placed the royal crown upon her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. The weight of the crown, perhaps cool and heavy, would have settled upon her head, a tangible symbol of her new, extraordinary destiny. To celebrate this momentous occasion, the king hosted another grand feast, a feast of Esther, for all his princes and his servants. It was a lavish affair, a testament to his joy and his desire to honor his new queen. He also proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces, a time of rest and celebration, and he distributed gifts with royal generosity, showering his kingdom with tokens of his benevolence, all in honor of his new queen, Esther. During this time, Esther continued to keep her Jewish heritage a secret, just as Mordecai had commanded her. She remained obedient to Mordecai's instructions, just as she had been when she was under his care as a young girl. Her new position as queen did not diminish her respect for her adopted father or her adherence to his wise counsel. Mordecai, meanwhile, continued his duties at the king's gate, always watchful, always concerned for Esther's safety and well-being, even as she now resided in the innermost chambers of the palace. One day, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, he overheard a conversation between two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh. These men were two of the king's chamberlains, serving as doorkeepers, guarding the threshold of the royal apartments. Their voices, perhaps hushed or conspiratorial, carried on the air, reaching Mordecai's attentive ears. What he overheard was deeply disturbing. They were plotting to lay hands on King Ahasuerus to assassinate him. The details of their plot, the hushed tones, the furtive glances, would have painted a chilling picture for Mordecai. Without hesitation, Mordecai acted. He immediately informed Queen Esther of the conspiracy. His message, perhaps conveyed through a trusted servant or a discreet note, would have reached her in the quiet luxury of her royal chambers. Esther, in turn, relayed the information to the king, attributing the discovery to Mordecai. This was a crucial step, ensuring that Mordecai received the proper credit and that the king understood the source of the warning. The matter was investigated, a thorough inquiry initiated by the king's command. The accusations were carefully examined, the evidence weighed, and the truth of Mordecai's report was confirmed. Bigthan and Teresh were indeed found guilty of plotting against the king. The punishment for such a heinous crime was swift and severe. Both men were hanged on a gallows, their lives forfeit for their treasonous intentions. To ensure that this act of loyalty and the king's justice were not forgotten, the incident was read in the book of the Chronicles, in the king's presence. This official record, meticulously kept by the royal scribes, served as a permanent testament to Mordecai's faithfulness and the king's deliverance. It was a quiet, almost unnoticed act at the time, but one that would, in the unfolding tapestry of events, prove to be of immense significance. Some time after these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, elevating him to a position of immense power and authority. Haman was a man of considerable influence already, but the king's new decree placed him above all the other princes and officials. His seat was set above all the other nobles who were with him, a clear sign of his elevated status. This promotion meant that all the king's servants who were at the king's gate were commanded to bow down and pay homage to Haman. It was a public display of deference, a recognition of his supreme authority, second only to the king himself. And indeed, all the king's servants at the gate did bow down and pay homage to Haman, acknowledging his newly acquired power. However, there was one man who did not bow, one man who refused to offer Haman the customary reverence. That man was Mordecai. Day after day, as Haman passed by, Mordecai remained upright, his head held high, refusing to bend his knee or prostrate himself. This defiance did not go unnoticed. The king's servants who were at the gate, those who worked alongside Mordecai, began to question his actions. "Why do you transgress the king's command?" they asked him, their voices perhaps tinged with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. They knew the strict protocols of the court, and Mordecai's refusal was a clear violation. They spoke to him about it day after day, trying to persuade him, to make him conform to the royal decree. But Mordecai steadfastly refused to listen to them. He explained his reasoning, revealing a truth he had previously kept hidden, "Because I am a Jew." His refusal was not merely an act of personal stubbornness, but a matter of religious conviction. For a Jew, bowing down to a man in such a manner could be seen as an act of idolatry, an affront to the one true God. This deeply held belief prevented him from offering Haman the homage that was demanded. When the other servants realized that Mordecai would not be swayed, and that his refusal stemmed from his Jewish faith, they reported it to Haman. They wanted to see if Mordecai's words would stand, if his explanation would be accepted, or if his defiance would bring about severe consequences. They watched to see what would become of Mordecai's matter, curious about how Haman, a man now accustomed to universal deference, would react to such an open challenge to his authority. When Haman learned that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, he was filled with fury. His anger was not a fleeting emotion, it was a deep, burning rage, fueled by pride and a sense of personal insult. To be defied by a mere gatekeeper, and a Jew at that, was an intolerable affront to his newly elevated status. However, merely laying hands on Mordecai alone seemed too trivial a punishment for Haman's inflated sense of grievance. He had learned of Mordecai's people, that he was a Jew, and in his vengeful heart, a far grander and more terrible scheme began to take shape. It was not enough to punish Mordecai. Haman sought a punishment that would encompass all of Mordecai's people, all the Jews throughout the entire kingdom of Ahasuerus. His fury, once focused on a single man, now expanded to embrace an entire nation, a chilling testament to the depth of his malice. In the first month, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus' reign, Haman cast pur, which means the lot, in the presence of Haman, day after day and month after month, until the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. This ancient practice of casting lots was a way of seeking divine guidance or determining fate, often used to decide important matters. Haman, in his desire to find the most auspicious time for his terrible plan, meticulously cast lots to determine the precise day and month for the annihilation of the Jews. The lots fell upon the 12th month, the month of Adar, indicating a period of almost a full year for his plan to be set in motion, a long, agonizing wait for the unsuspecting Jewish people. With the date determined, Haman approached King Ahasuerus, his voice undoubtedly smooth and persuasive, masking the dark intent of his heart. There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, he began, painting a picture of a fragmented, disloyal group. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's laws, so it is not profitable for the king to tolerate them. This was a cunning accusation, designed to appeal to the king's concern for order and the unity of his vast empire. Haman presented the Jews not as a religious group, but as a political threat, a people whose distinct customs and perceived disobedience made them a danger to the stability of the kingdom. He then offered a solution, a chilling proposal presented as a benefit to the king. If it pleases the king, Haman continued, his voice perhaps dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry out the king's business, to put into the king's treasuries. 10,000 talents of silver was an immense sum, a staggering amount of wealth that would have represented a significant portion of the empire's annual revenue. This offer was a powerful incentive, a bribe designed to sweeten the deal and make the king overlook the moral implications of Haman's request. It was a calculated move, appealing to the king's financial interests and his desire for a stable, unified kingdom. The king, perhaps swayed by Haman's persuasive words, the promise of such a vast sum of money, and the perceived threat to his authority, took off his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The signet ring was a symbol of the king's absolute authority. Its transfer to Haman meant that Haman now had the power to issue decrees in the king's name, decrees that would carry the full force of royal law. This act, simple yet profound, sealed the fate of the Jewish people, placing their very existence in the hands of their bitter enemy. Then the king addressed Haman, his voice perhaps dismissive, indicating his trust in his newly elevated minister. The silver is yours, and the people also, to do with them as seems good to you. With these words, King Ahasuerus effectively handed over an entire people to Haman's malicious will, granting him carte blanche to carry out his terrible plan. The casualness of the king's response, the swiftness with which he condemned an entire group of his subjects, speaks volumes about the absolute power of the monarch and the precarious position of minorities within such a vast and diverse empire. On the 13th day of the first month, the king's scribes were summoned. These skilled individuals, trained in the art of writing and record-keeping, were tasked with transcribing the royal decrees. Under Haman's direction, letters were written to all the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, and to the princes of each people. The decree was meticulously crafted, translated into the script of each province and into the language of each people, ensuring that its message would be understood by all. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's own signet ring, lending it undeniable authority. These letters were then dispatched by couriers, swift messengers who would carry the fateful decree to every corner of the vast empire. The message was clear and chilling. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, all the Jews, young and old, little children and women, were to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. Their property was to be plundered, their homes and possessions seized. It was a decree of total extermination, a genocidal order that left no room for escape or mercy. Imagine the couriers, riding hard across the sun-baked plains and through mountain passes, unknowingly carrying the death warrant for an entire people. A copy of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made public to all peoples, so that they should be ready for that day. The decree was not to be a secret act, it was to be openly proclaimed, giving the Jewish people a year's notice of their impending doom, a cruel twist of fate that would allow fear and despair to fester. The couriers, having received their orders, rode out in haste, propelled by the king's command, their horses hoofs pounding on the ancient roads, carrying the terrible news to the far-flung provinces. And Haman, having set his plan in motion, sat down with the king to drink, perhaps raising a goblet of royal wine, oblivious to the immense suffering he had unleashed. The city of Susa, meanwhile, was perplexed, a quiet unease settling over its bustling streets as the news of the decree began to spread, its inhabitants wondering at the meaning and implications of such a drastic and unprecedented order. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, the full horror of Haman's decree, he tore his clothes. This was a traditional sign of deep mourning, a visceral expression of grief and anguish. He put on sackcloth, a coarse, rough fabric worn in times of lamentation, and sprinkled ashes on his head, another ancient custom signifying sorrow and humility. Then he went out into the midst of the city, crying out with a loud and bitter cry, a sound of profound despair that would have cut through the usual hum of daily life in Susa. He went as far as the king's gate, but he did not enter it, for no one clothed in sackcloth was permitted to enter the king's gate, a strict protocol of the royal court. In every province where the king's command and his decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews. The news, carried by the swift couriers, spread like wildfire, bringing with it a wave of terror and despair. The Jewish people, scattered across the vast empire, reacted with fasting and weeping and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes, their bodies bowed in grief, their voices raised in lamentation. The joy and peace of their lives were shattered, replaced by a pervasive sense of dread and hopelessness. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai's distressed state, she was deeply distressed. The news of her adopted father's public display of mourning, so uncharacteristic of his usual composed demeanor, filled her with alarm. She sent garments to Mordecai, hoping he would take off his sackcloth and put on normal clothes, perhaps to spare him the public humiliation or to allow him to enter the gate and speak with her. But he would not accept them. His refusal to change his clothes was a clear indication of the depth of his sorrow and the gravity of the situation. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs whom the king had appointed to attend her. She commanded him to go to Mordecai to find out what was troubling him and why he was acting in such a way. Hathach, a trusted intermediary, went out to Mordecai in the city square, which was in front of the king's gate. Mordecai then recounted to him all that had happened, explaining in detail the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave Hathach a copy of the written decree that had been issued in Susa for their annihilation, so that Hathach could show it to Esther and explain it to her. His message to Esther was clear and urgent. She was to go into the king and plead with him for her people, to make supplication before him for their lives. The weight of an entire nation's fate now rested upon her shoulders, a burden that was both terrifying and unavoidable. Hathach returned to Esther and delivered Mordecai's words. Esther, in turn, spoke to Hathach and gave him a message for Mordecai, a message that revealed the perilous nature of her position. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner court without being summoned, there is but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, so that he may leave. This was the strict protocol of the Persian court, a rule designed to protect the king from assassination and to maintain the sanctity of his presence. To approach the king unbidden was to risk immediate execution. Esther then revealed her own vulnerability. As for me, I have not been called to come to the king for these 30 days. This was a significant detail. 30 days without a summons meant she was not currently in the king's favor, or at least not at the forefront of his thoughts. To approach him now, uninvited, would be an even greater risk, potentially sealing her own doom without even having the chance to speak for her people. Her words conveyed a sense of fear, a very human apprehension in the face of such a deadly gamble. When Esther's words were read to Mordecai, he sent back a powerful and challenging message to her. His response was not one of sympathy for her predicament, but a stark reminder of her unique position and the inescapable responsibility that came with it. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews, he began, his words cutting through any illusion of safety she might have harbored. He reminded her that her royal status would not protect her from Haman's decree. If all the Jews were to be annihilated, she, as a Jew, would inevitably share their fate. Her crown, her palace, her maids, none of it would be a shield against the coming storm. He then presented her with a profound and stirring challenge, a question that would echo through the ages, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. This was a bold statement of faith, an unwavering belief that God would ultimately provide salvation for his people, even if Esther chose not to act. But it also carried a dire warning: if she failed to seize this moment, not only would she and her family be destroyed, but she would also miss the opportunity to be an instrument of that deliverance, forever losing her chance at a glorious legacy. And then came the most poignant and famous line, a question that invited deep introspection and a recognition of divine purpose. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? This was the heart of Mordecai's appeal, a gentle but firm suggestion that her ascension to the throne, seemingly a matter of chance and beauty contests, might in fact be part of a larger, divine plan. Her entire life, her unique circumstances, had perhaps been orchestrated for this very moment, for this specific crisis. It was a call to courage, a summons to embrace her destiny, to recognize that her position was not merely for personal comfort but for a greater purpose. Esther, upon receiving Mordecai's powerful message, sent back her own resolute reply. Her fear, though still present, was now tempered by a newfound determination. She instructed Mordecai, "Go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me, do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And my young women will also fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish." Her words were a testament to her courage, a willingness to face death for the sake of her people. The request for a 3-day fast was a solemn act of communal prayer and repentance, a desperate plea for divine intervention. It underscored the gravity of the situation and her reliance on a power greater than her own. Her final declaration, "If I perish, I perish," was a brave acceptance of her fate, a surrender to the will of God, whatever the outcome. Mordecai, having received Esther's instructions, went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. He gathered the Jewish community in Susa, conveying Esther's urgent request for a fast. The city, already in a state of quiet apprehension, now saw its Jewish inhabitants unite in a solemn act of collective prayer and self-denial. For 3 days and 3 nights, they abstained from food and drink, their hearts heavy with fear yet clinging to a fragile hope. The air in the Jewish quarter would have been filled with the hushed murmurs of prayers, the quiet shuffling of feet, and the shared burden of their impending doom. On the 3rd day, after the fast had concluded, Esther prepared herself. She put on her royal robes, garments of exquisite beauty and regal splendor, choosing them with care, knowing that her appearance might be her only shield against the king's wrath. She then went into the inner court of the king's palace, standing in front of the king's house. The king was seated on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance, his gaze perhaps fixed on the doorway, unaware of the momentous encounter that was about to unfold. The inner court would have been quiet, perhaps the only sound the soft rustle of her robes as she walked, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. As the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she found favor in his eyes. A wave of relief, perhaps, washed over her as she saw his expression soften. He held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. This was the sign of acceptance, the gesture that meant her leave was spared, that she was permitted to approach. Esther drew near and touched the tip of the scepter, a symbolic act of acknowledging his mercy and authority. Then the king spoke to her, his voice perhaps gentle, curious about her unbidden appearance. "What is troubling you, Queen Esther? And what is your request?" "It shall be given to you, even to half of the kingdom." This was a truly extraordinary offer, a testament to the king's affection for her and his desire to please her. To offer half of his vast kingdom was a hyperbolic expression of his willingness to grant her almost anything. Esther, with her quiet wisdom, did not immediately reveal her true petition. Instead, she chose a more subtle approach, a strategy of gentle persuasion and careful timing. "If it pleases the king," she replied, her voice soft and respectful, "let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." This was her first move, an invitation to a private meal, a way to create an intimate setting where she could subtly begin to lay the groundwork for her plea. The king, pleased by her invitation, immediately commanded, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has requested." And so, the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Imagine the scene, the king, Haman, and Esther, seated at a table laden with fine foods and exquisite wines, the air perhaps scented with delicate perfumes and the aroma of the feast. The conversation would have been light, perhaps pleasantries exchanged, but beneath the surface, a silent tension would have simmered, known only to Esther. As they drank wine at the banquet, the king again addressed Esther, reiterating his generous offer. "What is your petition? And it shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom, it shall be done." He was eager to fulfill her desire, to understand the reason for her unusual summons. Esther, still not ready to reveal the full extent of her plea, responded with another invitation. "My petition and my request is this: if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them tomorrow. And tomorrow I will do as the king has said." Her delay was deliberate, a way to build anticipation, to further endear herself to the king, and perhaps to allow Haman to grow more complacent in his pride. She was weaving a delicate web, slowly drawing her unsuspecting prey closer. Haman left the banquet that day joyful and glad of heart. He was undoubtedly puffed up with pride, having been singled out for such an honor by the queen, invited to a private banquet with the king and queen not once, but twice. His ego, already inflated by his recent promotion, soared even higher. He felt himself to be at the pinnacle of power and influence, a man favored by both the king and the queen. However, as Haman passed through the king's gate, his joy was suddenly overshadowed. He saw Mordecai sitting there, and Mordecai neither stood up nor trembled before him. This continued defiance, this unwavering refusal to acknowledge Haman's authority, ignited Haman's fury once more. The sight of Mordecai, a lone figure of resistance amidst a sea of deference, was a bitter thorn in Haman's side, spoiling his triumph and reminding him of the one person who refused to bow. Despite his rage, Haman restrained himself and went home. But his anger simmered beneath the surface, a dangerous heat. He called together his friends and his wife, Zeresh, eager to boast of his accomplishments and perhaps to vent his frustration. He recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the multitude of his sons, and all the ways in which the king had promoted him and elevated him above the other princes and servants. He spoke of his unparalleled access to the king, and then, with a flourish, he added, "Even Queen Esther invited no one but me to come with the king to the banquet she prepared, and tomorrow also I am invited by her along with the king." He reveled in the exclusivity of the invitations, seeing them as further proof of his supreme importance. Yet, despite all these honors, despite all his wealth and power, Haman confessed, "All this avails me nothing whenever I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." The presence of Mordecai, his persistent refusal to bow, was a constant irritant, a dark cloud overshadowing all of Haman's triumphs. It was a testament to the corrosive power of pride and hatred, how one small act of defiance could negate all the vast pleasures of a powerful man. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends offered him a suggestion, a seemingly simple solution to his Mordecai problem. "Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made," they advised, their voices perhaps eager to please him, "and in the morning speak to the king that Mordecai may be hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the banquet." A gallows 50 cubits high, an imposing structure of 75 feet, would have been visible from a great distance, a public display of Haman's power and a stark warning to anyone who dared to defy him. The idea was to eliminate the source of his irritation, to remove Mordecai from his sight, so that Haman could fully enjoy his elevated status and the queen's special favor. This suggestion pleased Haman, and he commanded the gallows to be made. The construction would have begun that very night, the sound of hammers and saws perhaps echoing faintly in the quiet darkness of Susa, building an instrument of death for an unsuspecting man. On that very night, sleep fled from the king. Perhaps it was the weight of his responsibilities, or a restless spirit, or perhaps a divine hand stirring his thoughts. Whatever the cause, he could not find rest. He commanded that the book of memorable deeds, the chronicles be brought and read before him. These chronicles were the official records of the kingdom, meticulously detailing important events, decrees, and acts of loyalty or treason. As the royal scribe, perhaps with a soft, droning voice, read aloud from the ancient scrolls, the king listened, his mind wandering through the annals of his reign. Among the many entries, the scribe came to the passage that recorded how Mordecai had reported Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who had plotted to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. The king, his memory perhaps jogged by the reading, asked, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" His question was sharp, indicating a sudden realization, a sense that a loyal servant had been overlooked. His attendants, who stood before him, replied, "Nothing has been done for him." The answer hung in the air, a stark admission of oversight, a forgotten act of loyalty that had saved the king's life. Then the king asked, "Who is in the court?" At that very moment, Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The timing was uncanny, a remarkable coincidence that spoke of a higher power at work. The attendant replied to the king, "Look, Haman is standing in the court." The king commanded, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, his heart perhaps filled with anticipation, eager to present his request for Mordecai's execution. The king, however, preempted him. "What is to be done for the man whom the king desires to honor?" the king asked Haman. Haman, in his arrogance and self-absorption, immediately thought, "Whom would the king desire to honor more than me?" His mind, clouded by pride, could not conceive that the king might be thinking of anyone else. He saw himself as the obvious recipient of such a grand gesture. So Haman, believing the honor was intended for him, offered a lavish suggestion. "For the man whom the king desires to honor, let royal apparel be brought which the king has worn, and the horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown has been placed." These were symbols of immense honor, items directly associated with the king's person and authority. To wear the king's robes and ride his horse, adorned with a royal crown, would be an unprecedented public display of favor, elevating the recipient to a near-royal status. Haman continued, describing the elaborate ceremony, "And let the apparel and the horse be delivered into the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man whom the king desires to honor and lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor.'" This was a vision of ultimate public acclaim, a grand procession designed to publicly exalt the favored individual, making him the envy of all. Haman, in his mind, was already picturing himself as the center of this magnificent spectacle. Then the king spoke to Haman, his words cutting through Haman's self-congratulatory fantasy. "Make haste, take the apparel and the horse, as you have spoken, and do so for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing of all that you have spoken." The king's command must have struck Haman like a physical blow, shattering his illusions and replacing his joy with a cold, sickening dread. The man he intended to hang, the man he hated above all others, was now to be honored in the very way he had so grandly described for himself. The irony was cruel, the reversal of fortune absolute. Haman, his face perhaps pale with shock and humiliation, had no choice but to obey. He took the royal apparel and the horse, and he arrayed Mordecai. Then he led him on horseback through the city square of Susa, his voice, perhaps choked with bitterness, forced to proclaim before him, "Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor." Imagine the scene: Haman, the proud Agagite, the king's most favored minister, forced to publicly exalt his sworn enemy, the very man whose destruction he had plotted. The people of Susa, who had seen Mordecai in sackcloth just days before, now witnessed this astonishing spectacle, a testament to the unpredictable whims of royal power and the sudden shifts of fortune. After this public humiliation, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, resuming his humble position, his quiet dignity restored. But Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. He was utterly devastated, his pride shattered, his grand plans turned to bitter ashes. He recounted to his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. And his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, their voices now tinged with a new, ominous tone, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him." This was a chilling prophecy, a recognition that a divine hand might be at work, protecting Mordecai and ensuring Haman's downfall. Their words, once encouraging his malice, now foreshadowed his inevitable destruction. While they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet that Esther had prepared. The second banquet, the one Esther had so carefully orchestrated, was now upon them. Haman, still reeling from his public humiliation and the ominous words of his wife and friends, was ushered into the queen's presence, his heart heavy with foreboding. So the king and Haman came to drink wine with Queen Esther. As they drank, the king again spoke to Esther on the second day, his voice perhaps more insistent, sensing that the time for her revelation was near. "What is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be done." The king's generosity remained boundless, his affection for her undiminished. Then Queen Esther answered, her voice perhaps trembling slightly, but firm with resolve, knowing that this was the moment, the precise time for which she had been brought to the kingdom. "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted me as my petition, and my people as my request." Her words were a direct plea for her own life, a shocking revelation that she, the queen, was also in mortal danger. She did not immediately accuse Haman, but rather framed her request as a desperate plea for survival, a way to draw the king into her personal peril. She continued, her voice gaining strength as she laid bare the terrible truth. "For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as male and female slaves, I would have remained silent, for the affliction would not be comparable to the king's loss." Her words were carefully chosen, highlighting the extreme nature of the decree. Slavery, while terrible, would have been endurable, a loss of freedom but not of life. But utter annihilation, that was a different matter entirely, a crime against humanity that would result in an irreparable loss, not just for her people, but for the king's own kingdom. She subtly implied that such a widespread destruction would ultimately diminish the king's realm, a strategic appeal to his practical interests. But the adversary cannot compensate for the king's damage, she concluded, her voice perhaps filled with a quiet despair, emphasizing the irreversible nature of the planned genocide. The king, who had so casually given Haman the power to do as he pleased, was now confronted with the horrifying consequences of his own decree and the realization that his beloved queen was among the condemned. King Ahasuerus, his face perhaps contorted in confusion and anger, spoke to Queen Esther, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Who is he, and where is he, who would dare to do such a thing?" The king, who had unknowingly signed the death warrant for his queen and her people, was now demanding to know the identity of the villain. The irony was palpable, the king's own ignorance a stark contrast to Esther's desperate knowledge. Esther, seizing the moment, pointed directly to her tormentor. "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." Her words, delivered with a sudden, powerful clarity, must have pierced the opulent silence of the banquet hall. Haman, who had been sitting there, perhaps still nursing his wounded pride, was now utterly terrified. His face, which moments before might have been flushed with wine, would have drained of color, his mind racing to comprehend the sudden, catastrophic turn of events. He was trapped, exposed, his carefully constructed web of malice now unraveling before the king's furious gaze. The king, in a fit of rage, rose from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. His anger was too great to contain, too overwhelming to remain seated. He needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the banquet hall, to walk amidst the cool, dark green of the cypress trees, to process the shocking revelation. The realization that he had been manipulated, that his own queen was condemned by a decree he had authorized, must have burned within him. Haman, left alone with Queen Esther, knew that his fate was sealed. He realized that evil was determined against him by the king. He fell to his knees, pleading with Queen Esther for his leave, begging for mercy. He knew that the king's wrath, once ignited, was a terrifying force, and that his only hope lay in the queen's intercession. He prostrated himself before her, perhaps clutching at her royal robes, his pleas desperate and pathetic. As Haman was thus prostrating himself on the couch where Esther was, the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall. His return was sudden, and his eyes fell upon Haman in a compromising position. The sight, perhaps misinterpreted by the king in his rage, further fueled his fury. "Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?" the king exclaimed, his voice thundering with indignation. The words, spoken in his anger, were a death sentence. As the words left the king's mouth, the attendants immediately covered Haman's face, a customary act signifying that a condemned man was about to be executed. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, spoke up, perhaps seeing an opportunity to further solidify the king's wrath against Haman. "Look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good for the king, is standing at Haman's house." This was the final, damning piece of information, a cruel twist of fate that exposed Haman's malice in full. The very instrument of death he had prepared for his enemy was now ready for him. The king's command was swift and decisive. "Hang him on it." And so, they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. The swiftness of his downfall was absolute, a chilling testament to the unpredictable nature of power in the Persian court. The man who had sought to annihilate an entire people was himself annihilated, hoisted upon the very gallows he had so proudly constructed. The air, which had been thick with tension, now held the grim satisfaction of justice served, a quiet, somber moment as the fate of the wicked was sealed. On that very day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. The vast estate, the wealth, the servants, all that Haman had possessed, was now transferred to the queen, a tangible symbol of her triumph and the king's gratitude. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had revealed what he was to her. The king, now fully aware of Mordecai's identity and his relationship to the queen, recognized his loyalty and his wisdom. The man who had been overlooked, the man who had been targeted for death, was now brought into the king's inner circle. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. This was an act of immense significance, a transfer of power and authority. Mordecai, the humble gatekeeper, was now entrusted with the king's own signet ring, granting him the power to issue decrees in the king's name, just as Haman had done. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman, placing him in charge of the vast estate and all its resources. The reversal of fortunes was complete, the tables dramatically turned. The man who had been condemned was now exalted, and the man who had condemned him was utterly destroyed. Esther, however, was not yet finished. Despite Haman's execution and Mordecai's promotion, the decree for the annihilation of the Jews still stood. The letters, sealed with the king's ring, had been dispatched to all the provinces, and according to the unchangeable laws of the Medes and Persians, a written decree, once issued, could not be revoked. Her people were still in mortal danger, and her heart remained heavy with apprehension. She spoke again before the king, falling at his feet and weeping, pleading with him to avert the evil of Haman the Agagite and his plot that he had devised against the Jews. Her tears were genuine, her distress profound, as she implored the king to find a way to undo the terrible decree. The king held out the golden scepter to Esther, granting her permission to speak, indicating his willingness to listen to her renewed plea. Esther rose and stood before the king, her voice filled with a desperate urgency. "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces." She laid out her request clearly, asking for a direct revocation of Haman's murderous decree. She then articulated the depth of her anguish, her voice perhaps breaking with emotion. "For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?" Her words were a powerful appeal to the king's empathy, a reminder that these were not just abstract subjects, but her own family, her own people, facing imminent annihilation. Her personal suffering was intertwined with the fate of her nation, making her plea even more compelling. King Ahasuerus then said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, his voice perhaps now filled with a sense of regret and a desire to rectify his earlier mistake. "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged on the gallows because he laid his hand on the Jews." He acknowledged that justice had been served against Haman, but he also recognized that this alone was not enough to save the Jewish people. "You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews, as you please, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. This was an extraordinary delegation of power, a testament to the king's trust in Esther and Mordecai. Since a royal decree could not be revoked, the solution was to issue a new decree, one that would counteract the previous one. The power to craft this new law was now entirely in their hands. For a decree which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring cannot be revoked. The immutable nature of Persian law, which had initially been a source of terror, now became the very mechanism through which salvation could be achieved. So the king's scribes were summoned at that time, in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, and to the satraps, and the governors and princes of the provinces which were from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province according to its script, and to every people according to their language, and to the Jews according to their script and their language. This new decree was even more comprehensive than Haman's, reaching every corner of the vast empire, ensuring that its message would be understood by all. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. He then sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding on swift steeds bred from the royal stud, animals renowned for their speed and endurance. These couriers, unlike the previous ones, carried a message of hope and deliverance. The letters granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and to protect themselves. They were given permission to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, their little children and women, and to plunder their possessions. This new decree did not revoke the old one, but rather granted the Jews the legal right to defend themselves against any who would seek to carry out Haman's original order. It was a powerful act of self-defense, sanctioned by the king himself. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus was the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, the very same day that Haman had chosen for their destruction. This was a poetic justice, a complete reversal of fate. The tables had been turned, and the day intended for their annihilation would now become a day of their triumphant defense. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province and made public to all peoples, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The decree was to be openly proclaimed, ensuring that all understood the new legal framework and the rights granted to the Jewish people. The couriers, riding on the swift royal steeds, went out, urged on by the king's command, their mission now one of salvation rather than destruction. The decree was proclaimed in the citadel of Susa, and the city, which had been perplexed by the earlier decree, now saw a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a large crown of gold and a robe of fine linen and purple. The sight of him, adorned in such splendor, was a visual representation of his new status and the triumph of his people. The city of Susa rejoiced and was glad, perhaps seeing in Mordecai's elevation a sign of justice and a return to order. For the Jews, there was light and gladness and joy and honor. The darkness of despair had lifted, replaced by a radiant hope, a profound sense of relief and celebration. In every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his decree arrived, there was gladness and joy for the Jews, a feast and a good day. Many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. This was a remarkable outcome, a testament to the power of their deliverance. Seeing the king's favor and the dramatic reversal of their fortunes, many Gentiles chose to convert to Judaism, aligning themselves with a people who had been miraculously saved from destruction. The fear they inspired was not one of malice, but of awe, a recognition that a divine power was protecting them. Now in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and his decree were about to be executed, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred. The Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. This was the day of reckoning, the day when the decree of self-defense was put into action. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm. No one could withstand them, for the fear of them had fallen upon all the peoples. The fear that had once been directed at them was now turned upon their enemies, a powerful deterrent that shifted the balance of power. All the princes of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and those who did the king's business assisted the Jews, because the fear of the prophet Mordecai had fallen upon them. The prophet Mordecai's immense power and influence, second only to the king, ensured that the royal officials actively supported the Jews in their defense. For the prophet Mordecai was great in the king's palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For the man the prophet Mordecai grew more and more powerful. His authority was undeniable, his word carrying immense weight throughout the vast empire. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. And among those they killed were the 10 sons of Haman, the very man who had plotted their destruction, Parsandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Parata, Udaliah, Aradatha, Parmashta, Arasai, Aradai, and Visata. They executed Haman's sons, ensuring that his lineage of malice would not continue. However, they did not lay their hands on the plunder, a deliberate act that demonstrated their actions were not driven by greed but by self-preservation and justice. On that same day, the number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king. The king then said to Queen Esther, "In the citadel of Susa the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, and the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? And it shall be granted to you. And what is your request further? And it shall be done." The king, having heard the extent of the violence in Susa, was still willing to grant Esther further requests, recognizing the continued threat to her people. Esther replied, "If it pleases the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed to do again tomorrow according to today's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." Her request for a second day of defense in Susa suggests that the threat there was particularly persistent, or that she wanted to ensure a complete eradication of those who sought to harm her people within the capital. The hanging of Haman's sons, though already killed, was a symbolic act, a public display of their utter condemnation and a final, definitive closure to Haman's evil legacy. So the king commanded that it be done. A decree was issued in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. And the Jews who were in Susa gathered together on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men in Susa. Again, they did not lay their hands on the plunder. This second day of defense in Susa solidified the safety of the Jewish community within the capital, ensuring that no lingering threats remained. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces gathered to protect their lives and to get relief from their enemies and to kill 75,000 of those who hated them. They did not lay their hands on the plunder. This was a widespread act of self-defense, a coordinated effort across the vast empire, resulting in the elimination of those who had intended to destroy them. The number, 75,000, speaks to the scale of the threat they faced and the decisive nature of their response. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And on the 14th day of the month, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th and the 14th days of the month, and on the 15th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Because the Jews in Susa had fought for 2 days, their day of rest and celebration came a day later than those in the provinces. Therefore, the Jews of the villages, who live in the unwalled towns, celebrate the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day of gladness and feasting and a holiday, and for sending gifts of food to one another. This was the origin of the celebration, a way to commemorate their miraculous deliverance. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far. He enjoined them to observe the 14th day of the month of Adar and also the 15th day of the same month, annually, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month which was turned for them from sorrow into gladness and from mourning into a holiday. He instructed them to make them days of feasting and gladness, for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. This was the establishment of a new festival, a perpetual remembrance of their salvation. So the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to crush and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letter that Haman's wicked plot, which he had devised against the Jews, should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, they called these days Purim, after the term pur, which means of the lot. And so, because of all the words of this letter, and what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had happened to them, the Jews established and took upon themselves and their descendants and all who joined them, that they would not fail to observe these 2 days according to their writing and according to their appointed time every year. These days were to be remembered and observed throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim were not to fail from among the Jews, nor their memory perish from their descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, in words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had enjoined them, and as they had taken it upon themselves and their descendants in the matter of their fastings and their lamenting. The command of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. King Ahasuerus imposed a tribute on the land and on the coastlands of the sea. And all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not read in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, one who sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people. His rise to power was complete, his influence immense, and his legacy one of unwavering loyalty and profound dedication to his people. He was a beacon of hope and a protector, a man who, from a humble position at the king's gate, had risen to save an entire nation. The gentle breeze, carrying the faint scent of distant spices and dry earth, stirred the leaves of the date palms in the royal gardens of Susa, as the first stars began to prickle through the deepening twilight, casting a soft, diffused glow over the sprawling city, a city that had witnessed such extraordinary events, such dramatic reversals of fortune, and such a profound testament to courage and faith. A city now settling into the quiet hum of the approaching night, its ancient walls holding the echoes of a story that would be told for generations, a story of a queen who risked everything, and a people who found deliverance in the most unexpected of ways, a story whispered softly under the vast Persian sky, as the world slowly, gently, drifted into the quiet, profound stillness of a new dawn, a dawn that would break over the sprawling city of Susa, a city that had witnessed so much, its sun-baked bricks and towering gates now bathed in the soft, nascent light of morning. The air, still cool from the desert night, carried the faint scent of baking bread from distant kitchens and the earthy aroma of the palace gardens, where dew-kissed roses were just beginning to unfurl their petals, their colors muted in the gentle light. The vast palace complex, with its intricate carvings and gleaming tiles, slowly stirred, the first sounds of daily life beginning to emerge to the distant clatter of pottery, the soft murmur of servants, the gentle cooing of doves nesting in the eaves of the grand audience hall. It was into this waking world that the story of Esther, a young woman whose life had been irrevocably altered by the whims of a king and the machinations of a vengeful heart, would continue to unfold, its threads woven with both peril and a quiet, unyielding hope. Mordecai, her cousin and guardian, would have felt the weight of the coming day pressing upon him even before the sun had fully cleared the eastern horizon, a familiar ache in his heart that had grown with each passing day since the decree had been issued. He would rise from his simple pallet, perhaps in a small dwelling just beyond the palace gates or within the bustling Jewish quarter of Susa, a place where the familiar sounds of Aramaic and the rhythms of their ancient traditions offered a small comfort amidst the grandeur and foreignness of the Persian capital. The cool morning air would brush against his face as he made his ablutions, the scent of dust and distant cooking fires mingling with the faint, sweet perfume of the palace gardens carried on the breeze. He might have paused, his gaze drawn towards the towering walls of the royal residence, a structure that both protected and imprisoned the young queen he loved like a daughter. His thoughts, no doubt, would be a quiet tapestry of concern for Esther, for his people, and for the seemingly insurmountable decree that threatened to erase them from the face of the earth. The decree, sealed with the king's own signet ring, was a terrifying reality, a document that had been dispatched to all the king's provinces, from the farthest reaches of India to the borders of Ethiopia, written in the language and script of each people. Imagine the scribes, their fingers stained with ink, working tirelessly by lamplight in the chancellery, copying the chilling words onto papyrus scrolls, each one a death warrant. These scrolls would then be entrusted to the swift royal couriers, men mounted on the finest horses from the king's stables, their hooves thundering across the vast network of Persian roads, carrying the news of impending doom to every corner of the vast empire. The speed of these couriers was legendary, a testament to the organizational prowess of the Achaemenid Empire, with its well-maintained roads and strategically placed relay stations where fresh horses and riders awaited. To the ordinary citizen, the sight of a royal courier was usually a sign of important news, perhaps a new tax, a royal edict, or a declaration of war. But this particular message would have brought a different kind of terror, a cold dread that settled deep in the bones. Mordecai, dressed in sackcloth and ashes, a traditional sign of mourning and deep distress among his people, would have been a stark figure against the vibrant backdrop of Susa. His usual attire, perhaps the simple tunic and cloak of a palace official, would have been replaced by coarse, rough fabric, a physical manifestation of the anguish that tore at his soul. The ashes, sprinkled upon his head, would have mingled with the dust of the city, a visible lament for the fate that awaited his kinsman. He would not have confined his grief to the quiet corners of his home. Instead, he would have made his way to the very heart of the city, to the broad thoroughfare that led to the King's Gate, a place where people gathered, where news was exchanged, and where the pulse of Susa could be felt most keenly. His loud and bitter cry, a wail of despair, would have cut through the usual hum of market activity, drawing the attention of passers-by. This was not a private sorrow, it was a public lament, a desperate plea for recognition of the injustice that had been decreed. The King's Gate was a place of immense significance in ancient Persian cities. It was not merely an entrance but a center of civic life, a place where justice was administered, where merchants traded, and where officials conducted their business. To sit or stand at the King's Gate was to be in a position of some prominence or to seek an audience with those in power. For Mordecai to appear there in such a state was a deliberate act, a silent yet powerful protest. His presence, so visibly distressed, would have been a stark contrast to the usual pomp and circumstance associated with the palace. The guards, accustomed to the daily flow of courtiers and petitioners, would have noted his unusual appearance, perhaps with a mixture of curiosity and unease. No one in sackcloth was permitted to enter the King's Gate, a rule designed to maintain the decorum and sanctity of the royal presence, and so Mordecai would have remained just outside, his cries echoing against the imposing stone. News of Mordecai's public display of grief would inevitably reach the palace, carried by servants and eunuchs who moved like shadows through its opulent corridors. It would have been one of Esther's own maids, perhaps Hathach, a eunuch specifically appointed by the king to attend to her, who would have first brought her the disquieting report. Imagine the scene: Esther, within the luxurious confines of her private chambers, perhaps engaged in the meticulous rituals of beautification, or simply resting on silken cushions, surrounded by the fragrant perfumes and soft lamplight of her inner sanctum. The news of Mordecai's public mourning would have struck her with a profound sense of alarm and confusion. She would have known, intimately, the depth of Mordecai's character, his steadfastness, and his quiet strength. For him to be so openly distraught meant that something truly terrible had occurred, something far beyond the usual anxieties of court life. Her immediate reaction was one of deep distress for Mordecai himself. She would have sent clothing to him, fine garments from her own wardrobe, perhaps a richly embroidered tunic and a cloak, hoping that by changing his attire, he might be persuaded to shed his public display of sorrow and return to a place of safety and comfort. This gesture, while seemingly simple, was an act of both love and concern, an attempt to alleviate his immediate suffering and to understand the cause of his profound grief. But Mordecai, steadfast in his purpose, would refuse the garments. His refusal would have only deepened Esther's apprehension. confirming her worst fears that the matter was far too grave to be assuaged by mere changes of raiment. Unable to go to Mordecai herself, bound by the strict protocols of the harem and the king's court, Esther would send Hathach, her trusted eunuch, to him. Hathach, a man who would have navigated the complex social landscape of the palace with practiced ease, would have been a familiar and comforting presence for Esther, a bridge between her secluded world and the realities beyond her chambers. He would have been privy to many of her confidences, a silent witness to her daily life as queen. His mission was clear: to ascertain the precise cause of Mordecai's distress and to understand the nature of the crisis that had gripped him. Hathach would have made his way through the bustling palace courtyards, past the shimmering pools and fragrant gardens, out through the king's gate, where Mordecai remained, a solitary figure of sorrow. Upon meeting Mordecai, Hathach would have found him still clad in sackcloth, his face etched with a grief that transcended personal loss. Mordecai, seeing a trusted messenger from Esther, would have poured out his heart, recounting the entire story of Haman's wicked plot. He would have explained the precise sum of money, 10,000 talents of silver, that Haman had offered to deposit into the royal treasury in exchange for the king's permission to annihilate the Jews. This immense sum, equivalent to a vast fortune, perhaps 2/3 of the empire's annual revenue, would have been a staggering detail, revealing the depth of Haman's malice and his willingness to pay an exorbitant price for his vengeance. Mordecai would have also shown Hathach a copy of the Red Decree, the very document that had been dispatched throughout the provinces, its words chillingly clear in their pronouncement of doom. He would have urged Hathach to take this copy back to Esther, to explain the dire situation to her, and to implore her to go to the king, to plead for her people, and to intercede on their behalf. Imagine the weight of that scroll in Hathach's hands as he returned to Esther's chambers. The journey back through the palace, which moments before might have seemed a familiar path, would now be imbued with a sense of urgency and foreboding. He would deliver Mordecai's message, his voice perhaps hushed with the gravity of the news, his eyes reflecting the despair he had witnessed. Esther, listening to Hathach's report, would have felt the full impact of the impending catastrophe. The realization that her own people, her family, her heritage, were marked for destruction would have been a profound shock, a cold wave washing over the luxurious warmth of her royal life. Her initial response, however, was one of practical fear, a fear rooted in the strict, unyielding laws of the Persian court. She would have explained to Hathach, and through him, to Mordecai, the perilous nature of approaching the king unbidden. The law was absolute: anyone, man or woman, who dared to enter the king's inner court without being summoned faced a single, terrible consequence to death. The only exception was if the king extended his golden scepter towards them, a gesture that signified royal favor and granted permission to approach. Without that gesture, the intruder would be immediately executed. This law, designed to protect the king's person and his absolute authority, was a formidable barrier, a silent, ever-present threat to anyone who might contemplate such a desperate act. Esther had not been called to the king for 30 days, an unusually long period, which might have added to her apprehension, suggesting a possible waning of his initial intense favor or simply the king's preoccupation with other matters of state. The thought of risking her life, even for her people, would have been a terrifying prospect, a moment of profound internal conflict. When Mordecai received Esther's message, his response was immediate and unyielding, a powerful rebuke to her hesitation. he would have sent back word, perhaps through Hathach again, a message that cut through her fear with the sharp edge of truth. Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews, he would have declared, his words carrying the weight of ancient wisdom and a deep understanding of their shared fate. He reminded her that her position, her royal status, would offer no sanctuary from the decree. If she remained silent, if she failed to act, deliverance for the Jews would come from another place, from a source beyond their understanding, but she and her father's house would perish. This was a stark warning, a reminder that inaction carried its own, equally devastating, consequences. Then came the pivotal question, the one that would echo through the annals of history, a question imbued with a quiet, yet immense, power. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? These words, spoken by Mordecai, were not a command but a profound suggestion, an invitation to consider a larger purpose, a divine hand at work in the seemingly random events of her life. It was a call to destiny, a whisper of a possibility that her elevation to queen, a position of unimaginable power and privilege for a young Jewish orphan, was not merely a twist of fate but a deliberate placement, a preparation for this very moment of crisis. The weight of these words, delivered to Esther in the quiet solitude of her chambers, would have settled upon her, forcing her to confront the full measure of her responsibility and the potential significance of her unique position. Imagine Esther, alone with these thoughts, the vibrant colors of her chambers perhaps seeming to fade into a blur as her mind grappled with the enormity of Mordecai's challenge. The scent of exotic flowers, the soft rustle of silk, the distant sounds of the palace to all would have receded as she faced this profound decision. The fear of death, a very real and present danger, would have warred with the desperate plea of her people, the memory of Mordecai's anguished cries, and the quiet, insistent voice of destiny that his words had awakened within her. It was a moment of profound courage, a turning point where personal safety was weighed against the fate of an entire nation. After a period of reflection, a time where the quiet ticking of the palace clocks might have seemed to amplify the silence of her decision-making, Esther would send her resolute reply to Mordecai. Her message was simple, yet imbued with a profound strength and a quiet determination that belied her earlier fear. Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Suosa, and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. These words, if I perish, are among the most poignant and powerful in the entire narrative. They are not spoken with bravado or a dramatic flourish, but with a quiet, almost resigned courage, a recognition of the immense risk she was undertaking and a willingness to face the ultimate consequence. It was a conscious decision to step beyond the bounds of personal safety and embrace a higher calling, a testament to her deep love for her people and her profound connection to Mordecai. The request for a 3-day fast was significant. Fasting was a traditional practice among the Jews in times of great distress, a communal act of humility, repentance, and fervent prayer, a way of seeking divine intervention in moments of seemingly insurmountable crisis. By asking all the Jews in Susa to fast with her, Esther was not only seeking spiritual strength but also uniting her people in a shared act of supplication, forging a bond of collective hope and desperation. Her maids, likely non-Jewish women who had become her trusted companions, would also join her in this solemn observance, a testament to their loyalty and the depth of their connection to their queen. Mordecai, upon receiving Esther's message, would have immediately understood the gravity of her decision and the immense courage it required. He would have gone at once to gather the Jewish community in Susa, spreading the word of the queen's request for a 3-day fast. Imagine the scene in the Jewish quarter, the hushed conversations, the solemn faces, the collective understanding of the immense stakes involved. Families would have gathered, preparing for the days of abstinence, their prayers rising like a silent incense towards the heavens. The city of Susa, with its usual hustle and bustle, would have carried on unaware of the profound spiritual battle being waged within its walls, a battle for the very existence of a people. During these 3 days and nights, Esther, secluded in her chambers, would have engaged in a profound period of introspection and prayer. The rich tapestries and gleaming ornaments of her room would have seemed almost irrelevant, overshadowed by the weight of her impending task. She would have shed her royal finery, perhaps dressing in simpler garments, her focus entirely on the spiritual preparation for her dangerous encounter with the king. The silence of her fasting would have been broken only by the soft murmurs of her prayers, her heart heavy with the fate of her people, yet resolute in her commitment. When the 3 days and nights of fasting were complete, Esther would have prepared herself for her fateful audience with King Ahasuerus. This was not merely a matter of donning beautiful clothes, it was a ritual of transformation, a deliberate act of presenting herself in a manner that would be most likely to evoke the king's favor and compassion. She would have put on her royal robes, garments of exquisite beauty and craftsmanship, perhaps woven with threads of gold and silver, adorned with precious jewels that would catch the light. The choice of her attire would have been carefully considered, designed to emphasize her regal status and her beauty, to remind the king of the woman he had chosen above all others to be his queen. The scent of myrrh and frankincense, the rich perfumes often used in royal preparations, would have filled her chambers, a delicate veil of fragrance. With a quiet resolve, Esther would have made her way from her private apartments, through the inner courts of the palace, towards the king's throne room. This walk, though perhaps not physically long, would have been an immense journey of courage. Each step would have carried her closer to the precipice of life or death. The palace, usually a place of familiar routine, would have felt charged with a palpable tension, every shadow seeming to lengthen, every distant sound amplifying the beating of her own heart. The eunuchs and guards she passed would have recognized the significance of her presence, their faces perhaps betraying a flicker of concern or admiration for her daring. Finally, she would have stood in the inner court of the palace, directly opposite the king's hall. The great doors, perhaps made of cedarwood inlaid with bronze, would have been open, revealing the majestic sight of King Ahasuerus seated upon his royal throne. The throne itself would have been a magnificent spectacle, likely crafted from ivory and gold, adorned with precious stones, positioned on a raised dais that commanded the entire hall. The king, dressed in his royal robes, his crown gleaming, would have been a formidable figure, his expression perhaps impassive, his gaze sweeping over the court. Esther would have stood there, in full view of the king, waiting. The air in the vast hall would have been thick with anticipation, the silence profound. All eyes, those of the king, his courtiers, and any officials present, would have been fixed upon her. It was a moment suspended in time, a silent plea hanging in the balance. Her heart would have pounded, a drumbeat against her ribs, yet outwardly she would have maintained a composure befitting a queen. The seconds would have stretched into an eternity as she awaited the king's decision, the gesture that would determine her fate and, by extension, the fate of her people. And then, the moment of truth. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, a wave of royal favor, perhaps a flicker of recognition, a memory of their shared past, would have swept over him. He would have extended the golden scepter that was in his hand towards her. This simple, yet profoundly significant, gesture was her lifeline, her reprieve from certain death. It was a sign that she had found favor in his eyes, that her life was spared, and that she was permitted to approach. Imagine the quiet relief that would have washed over her, a release of the tension that had held her captive. Esther would then have approached the throne, her steps measured and graceful, and touched the tip of the golden scepter, a symbolic act of acceptance and submission to the king's authority. Her life was now secure, at least for the moment. The king, perhaps intrigued by her unexpected appearance, or perhaps genuinely pleased to see her after a month's absence, would have addressed her, his voice resonating through the great hall. "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half the kingdom." This was a grand, almost hyperbolic, declaration, typical of Persian kings, signifying his immense power and his willingness to grant her almost anything. It was an open invitation, a moment of immense opportunity. But Esther, with a wisdom that belied her youth, did not immediately present her ultimate request. She understood the delicate dance of courtly politics, the need to build anticipation, to create an atmosphere of intimacy and trust before revealing the true gravity of her petition. Her response was calm, measured, and subtly strategic. "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet which I have prepared for him." This was a brilliant move. By inviting Haman as well, she was not only elevating his status in the king's eyes but also bringing her adversary into her own carefully constructed sphere of influence. It would have piqued the king's curiosity, wondering why his queen would extend such an invitation and what she truly wished to discuss. The king, pleased by her request, would have immediately commanded that Haman be brought quickly, so that they might honor Esther's invitation. Imagine the scene at the banquet later that day. The royal dining hall, a place of immense splendor, would have been prepared with meticulous care. Tables laden with the finest delicacies, served on dishes of gold and silver, would have gleamed under the soft light of oil lamps. The air would have been fragrant with exotic spices, roasted meats, and fine wines. Esther, seated beside the king, with Haman in a place of honor, would have maintained her composure, her inner turmoil carefully hidden beneath a serene exterior. The conversation would have flowed, perhaps light and pleasant, as the king and Haman enjoyed the queen's hospitality. As they drank wine, the king, still curious about Esther's true purpose, would have reiterated his offer. "What is your petition?" "It shall be granted to you." "And what is your request?" "Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done." He was giving her another chance, perhaps expecting a request for jewels, land, or some personal favor. But again, Esther would have demurred, her response carefully crafted to extend the suspense and deepen the king's intrigue. "My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, Then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them tomorrow, and tomorrow I will do according to the king's word." This second invitation, another banquet, would have further heightened the king's curiosity and, perhaps, Haman's ego. Haman would have left the banquet that day, his heart swelling with pride and self-importance. To be invited not once, but twice, to a private banquet with the king and queen was an unprecedented honor, a clear sign of his elevated status and the king's immense favor. He would have walked through the palace gates, his chest puffed out, basking in the glow of his perceived triumph. However, as he passed through the king's gate, his eyes would have fallen upon Mordecai, still sitting there, perhaps no longer in sackcloth but still refusing to bow or pay him homage. The sight of Mordecai, his persistent defiance, would have instantly extinguished Haman's joy, turning his pride into a burning rage. It was a stark reminder of the one man who refused to acknowledge his greatness, the one small thorn in his otherwise perfect life. This deep-seated hatred, festering within him, would have overshadowed all the honors he had received. Upon returning home, Haman would have summoned his friends and his wife, Zeresh, to boast of his immense wealth, the multitude of his children, and all the ways in which the king had promoted him, exalting him above all the other officials and servants. He would have recounted, with relish, the extraordinary honor of being invited to the queen's private banquet, not once, but twice, alongside the king himself. "Yet all this avails me nothing," he would have declared, his voice thick with bitterness, "as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." His wife, Zeresh, and all his friends, eager to appease his wrath and perhaps to further their own standing, would have offered a chilling suggestion. They advised him to have a gallows made, 50 cubits high to an immense structure, approximately 75 feet tall, a towering symbol of his power and vengeance. They suggested that in the morning he should speak to the king, requesting permission to hang Mordecai on it. Then go in merrily with the king to the banquet, they would have concluded, their words painting a picture of a world where Haman's every desire was fulfilled. This counsel would have greatly pleased Haman, confirming his own vengeful impulses. He would have immediately given orders for the gallows to be constructed, the wood perhaps already being hauled into his courtyard, the sounds of its construction beginning to echo into the quiet Persian night, a night that held within its deepening shadows the unexpected turn of a king's sleeplessness, a seemingly insignificant detail that would unravel Haman's carefully laid plans and shift the very course of destiny, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the vast, intricate tapestry of royal affairs, as the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the deep, velvet expanse of the Persian sky, casting their ancient, silent light over the sleeping city of Susa, a city poised on the edge of a revelation, a truth about to be gently, slowly, brought into the light, as the world drifted deeper into the soft, unhurried embrace of slumber. The new day, like so many before it, began to stir with the faintest blush of dawn, painting the eastern horizon in hues of rose and lavender, a gentle promise of the sun's slow ascent over the distant Zagros mountains. The air, which had held the cool, still breath of night, now began to soften, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil from the palace gardens, mingled with the distant, sweet aroma of baking bread from the city's awakening kitchens. Inside the royal complex, the first birds, perhaps sparrows or doves nesting in the high eaves of the great halls, began their quiet chirping, a soft, almost hesitant chorus that slowly grew into the gentle symphony of a new morning. The massive stone walls of the palace, still cool to the touch from the long night, began to absorb the nascent warmth, their ancient surfaces slowly shifting from the deep, purplish shadows to a lighter, more golden gray. Mordecai, a man whose heart carried the weight of his people's history and the quiet burden of their present, found himself drawn to the familiar, bustling energy of the palace gate. It was here, amidst the comings and goings of officials, merchants, and petitioners, that he often sat, a silent observer, his gaze thoughtful, his presence a quiet fixture. He was dressed, as was his custom, in the simple, unadorned garments of a court official, perhaps a tunic of undyed linen, its fabric softened by countless washings, and a cloak of plain wool, offering a modest protection against the morning's lingering chill. The sounds of the gate were a constant, yet never jarring, backdrop to his thoughts, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer from a nearby workshop, the low murmur of conversations in Aramaic and Old Persian, the creak of wooden carts laden with provisions for the palace kitchens, and the soft padding of sandals on the well-worn flagstones. He might have observed the arrival of a caravan, its camels swaying with their burdens, their bells tinkling softly, or perhaps a group of scribes, their ink-stained fingers already preparing for the day's endless task of documentation. The air here was often thick with the dust stirred by countless footsteps, mingled with the pungent scent of animal hides from a nearby tannery and the sweet, cloying aroma of spices being unloaded from a merchant's cart. His mind, however, was not entirely consumed by the mundane rhythms of the gate. A quiet apprehension, a subtle tightening in his chest, had begun to settle upon him. It was a feeling born not of a specific event, but of the general atmosphere that had permeated the court since the unsettling decree, a decree that had been sealed with the king's own signet ring, its implications still rippling through the Jewish community like an unseen, chilling current. He had heard the whispers, the hushed conversations in the marketplace, the worried glances exchanged between his people. The edict, though ostensibly aimed at Haman's perceived enemies, had cast a long, dark shadow over all those who were not Persian, particularly the Jews, who were known for their distinct customs and their unwavering devotion to their own God. This distinction, once tolerated, now felt like a dangerous vulnerability. Mordecai's thoughts drifted, as they often did, to Esther, his young cousin, whom he had raised as his own daughter. He remembered her as a child, her eyes wide with curiosity, her laughter like the chime of small bells in the quiet courtyard of their home. He recalled the day she was taken, along with so many other young women, into the lavish, yet isolating, confines of the king's harem. It had been a day marked by a strange mixture of sorrow and a quiet, almost reluctant, hope. He had advised her then, with a heavy heart but a clear purpose, to keep her Jewish identity a secret, a small shield in a world that could be both dazzling and cruel. He had hoped, perhaps, that her beauty, her gentle spirit, and her quiet wisdom might find favor, not just for herself, but for the sake of their people. And indeed, she had found favor, rising to the unimaginable position of queen, a woman of their lineage sitting on the very throne of Persia. Yet, even this triumph, this miraculous ascent, now felt precarious, a delicate flower blooming on the edge of a precipice. As the sun climbed higher, casting longer, sharper shadows across the courtyard, Mordecai's unease deepened. he began to notice a subtle shift in the demeanor of those around him. The usual boisterous greeting seemed more subdued, the smiles less genuine, the eyes holding a flicker of something akin to fear or suspicion. He overheard fragments of conversations, hushed and quickly ended when he drew near, about a new decree, a royal pronouncement, its details still vague but its implications undeniably ominous. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, laden with unspoken anxieties. Then, a figure approached, moving with a hurried, almost frantic energy that was unusual for the normally measured pace of the court. It was one of the king's eunuchs, a man named Hathach, who served as Esther's personal attendant, a trusted intermediary between the queen and the outside world. Hathach's face, usually composed, was now etched with a mixture of distress and urgency. He moved directly towards Mordecai, his eyes darting around as if to ensure their conversation would not be overheard. The soft rustle of his silk robes, usually a gentle sound, now seemed to carry a note of agitation. The scent of the perfumed oils he wore, typically a pleasant aroma, now seemed almost sharp in its intensity. Hathach spoke in a low, urgent whisper, his voice barely audible above the general hum of the gate, yet each word landed with the weight of a stone in Mordecai's heart. He recounted, with a tremor in his voice, the details of the decree that had been issued, a decree that called for the annihilation of all Jews throughout the vast Persian Empire on a specific day, the 13th day of the 12th month, Adar. He spoke of Haman's insidious plot, his deep-seated hatred, and the king's unwitting consent, given without full knowledge of the target. He described the grim efficiency with which the royal scribes had dispatched the edicts, written in the king's name and sealed with his ring, to every province, from India to Kush. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and cold, like a sudden, unexpected winter wind. Mordecai listened, his face impassive, but his mind raced, processing the horrifying implications. A chill, far deeper than the morning air, settled into his bones. This was not merely a threat, it was a death sentence, encompassing every man, woman, and child of his people, a complete eradication. The quiet, almost imperceptible apprehension he had felt earlier now coalesced into a stark, undeniable terror. He imagined the fear that would now grip every Jewish household, the weeping in the streets, the desperate prayers echoing in homes across the empire. He pictured the faces of his people, their quiet resilience, their enduring faith, now threatened with utter obliteration. A sudden, profound grief washed over him, a wave so powerful it threatened to buckle his knees. He tore his clothes, ripping the fine linen tunic and wool cloak, a traditional gesture of deep mourning and despair. The sound of the tearing fabric was sharp in the relative quiet of their hushed conversation. He then donned sackcloth, a coarse, rough fabric made of goat hair, its prickly texture a physical manifestation of the agony in his soul. He sprinkled ashes upon his head, their gritty coolness a stark contrast to the burning anguish within him. These were not mere theatrical gestures, they were the outward signs of an inward desolation, a man stripped bare of all comfort, consumed by a sorrow too vast to contain. He let out a loud and bitter cry, a wail that was not a shriek of panic, but a deep, guttural lamentation, a sound that carried the weight of generations of suffering and the immediate horror of the impending doom. It was a cry that seemed to echo not just through the palace gate, but through the very stones of Susa, a mournful sound that spoke of a people facing an unimaginable end. He walked through the city, his cries echoing, his appearance a stark contrast to the usual order and decorum of the royal city. The sight of him, a respected court official, in such a state of profound grief, drew startled glances and hushed whispers. People paused in their daily tasks, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The market vendors, usually boisterous, fell silent, their wares momentarily forgotten. The children, usually playful, stopped their games, their small faces reflecting the sudden seriousness of the adults around them. The air, which had been filled with the ordinary sounds of commerce and life, now seemed to hold a heavy, almost expectant silence, broken only by the prophet Mordecai's mournful lament. He walked to the very edge of the king's gate, as far as he could go in his mourning attire, for no one in sackcloth and ashes was permitted to enter the royal precincts. There he sat, a solitary figure of despair, a living embodiment of the catastrophe that threatened his people. The sun, now high in the sky, beat down upon him, but he felt only the cold grip of fear and sorrow. The dust of the road, stirred by the occasional passing cart, settled upon his sackcloth, adding to the grim tableau. Inside the palace, Esther, in the quiet luxury of her chambers, remained unaware of the storm brewing outside the royal walls. Her days were a tapestry of carefully orchestrated routines, of silk and perfume, of attendance and royal duties. The sounds that reached her were typically muted, the distant strains of lyres from the women's quarters, the soft rustle of expensive fabrics, the gentle murmur of her handmaidens. The air in her rooms was always fragrant with exotic spices and floral essences, a stark contrast to the dust and despair outside. It was her attendants, the young women who moved with quiet grace through her chambers, who first noticed the unusual commotion at the king's gate. They heard the distant, mournful cries, a sound so out of place in the carefully controlled environment of the palace. They saw the unusual gathering of people, their faces etched with concern, their gazes fixed on the grieving figure. The news, carried by hushed whispers and hurried glances, eventually reached Esther's ears. It was a fragmented report, a description of the prophet Mordecai, her beloved cousin, in deep mourning, his clothes torn, his head covered in ashes, his lamentations echoing through the city. Esther was deeply distressed by this news. The thought of Mordecai, her protector, her father figure, in such a state of public grief, was profoundly unsettling. It was entirely unlike him, a man known for his quiet dignity and measured demeanor. A knot of worry began to form in her stomach. She immediately sent garments to him, rich robes of fine linen and embroidered silk, hoping he would put them on and shed the symbols of his sorrow, believing perhaps that his distress was due to some personal misfortune, some private grief that could be assuaged by comfort and care. The soft, smooth fabric of the royal clothes, imbued with the scent of palace perfumes, was meant to be a gentle balm, a return to normalcy. But Mordecai refused the garments. His rejection was firm, unwavering, a silent testament to the depth of his anguish and the gravity of the situation. The attendants returned, their faces troubled, bearing the untouched clothes, their message clear: Mordecai's sorrow was too profound to be covered by mere finery. This refusal, more than any words, conveyed to Esther the true seriousness of the matter. Her distress deepened, turning into a gnawing anxiety. She knew then that something truly terrible had transpired, something that transcended personal grief. Unable to bear the uncertainty, and forbidden by custom from leaving her chambers without royal summons, Esther sent for Hathach, the trusted eunuch who served her. He was a familiar and comforting presence, a bridge between her secluded world and the bustling court. She instructed him to go to Mordecai, to find out the precise cause of his profound distress, to understand what had driven him to such a public display of mourning. She waited, pacing her richly carpeted chambers, the soft wool muffling her footsteps, her mind racing with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The scent of the jasmine and rose petals scattered on her floor, usually soothing, now seemed cloying, almost suffocating. The gentle light filtering through the high windows, usually a source of calm, now felt oppressive. Hathach, with his usual quiet efficiency, made his way to the king's gate, navigating the curious glances and hushed conversations until he reached Mordecai. He found him still sitting there, a picture of abject sorrow, the sackcloth rough against his skin, the ashes clinging to his hair and beard. The air around Mordecai seemed to hum with a palpable despair. Hathach approached with deference, his voice low and respectful, conveying the queen's concern and her urgent desire to understand. Mordecai, seeing Hathach, knew this was his opportunity, his chance to convey the terrible truth to Esther. He recounted the entire story, leaving no detail unspoken. He explained Haman's malicious plot, his deep-seated hatred for the Jews, his offer of 10,000 talents of silver to the royal treasury, a staggering sum, enough to sway even a king, in exchange for permission to annihilate them. He described the king's unsuspecting agreement, the issuance of the decree, and the swift dispatch of the letters to all the provinces. He spoke of the specific date, the 13th day of Adar, a date that now loomed like a dark, inevitable shadow. As he spoke, his voice, though still filled with sorrow, also held a note of desperate urgency, a plea for understanding and action. He even gave Hathach a copy of the written decree, a chilling document penned in the elegant script of the royal scribes, bearing the king's seal, so that Esther could read the horrifying words for herself, see the stark reality of the threat. The parchment, crisp and official, felt cold and heavy in Hathach's hand. Then, with a gaze that held the full weight of his despair and his hope, Mordecai charged Hathach with a direct message for Esther. He implored her to go to the king, to plead with him, to intercede for her people. His voice, though still soft, carried an undeniable authority, a desperate conviction. Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews, he urged, his words painting a stark picture of their shared fate. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? The words, though delivered through Hathach, resonated with the quiet power of a prophecy, a divine calling. Hathach returned to Esther's chambers, his steps heavier, his heart burdened by the terrible news. He delivered Mordecai's message, his voice hushed, his eyes conveying the gravity of the situation. He presented her with a copy of the decree, its official script a chilling testament to the impending doom. Esther read the words, her eyes scanning the precise, legalistic language that condemned her entire people. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin pale and cold. The luxurious surroundings of her chamber, the soft silks and rich perfumes, suddenly felt like a gilded cage, a place of isolation rather than security. The reality of her situation, the immense danger, and the impossible request settled upon her with crushing weight. Her first reaction was one of profound fear, a natural human response to such an overwhelming threat. She knew the strict laws of the Persian court, laws that were as unyielding as the massive stone pillars of the palace. To approach the king without being summoned was a transgression punishable by death. The only exception was if the king extended his golden scepter, a gesture of mercy and invitation. But to presume upon his favor, to risk his displeasure, was a terrifying prospect. She, a queen, yet also a woman, was bound by these rigid protocols. She had not been called to the king for 30 days, a detail that weighed heavily on her mind. This absence from his presence, though not necessarily a sign of disfavor, certainly did not suggest a moment of particular warmth or receptiveness. The thought of facing his unpredictable temperament, of risking her leave for a cause that seemed insurmountable, filled her with dread. She sent Hathach back to Mordecai with her answer, a message born of her fear and her understanding of the court's perilous rules. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being summoned, there is but one law, to be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may leave. But as for me, I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. Her words were a statement of fact, a clear articulation of the immense risk, a quiet plea for understanding of her predicament. The message was delivered back to Mordecai, a soft refusal, a gentle pushback against the impossible demand. Mordecai received her reply, his heart sinking, but his resolve remained unshaken. He understood her fear, the very real danger she faced. Yet, the fate of their entire people hung in the balance, a weight that far surpassed any individual fear. He sent Hathach back to Esther with a message that was both a challenge and a profound appeal, a call to courage that transcended personal safety. His words were not harsh, but they carried the undeniable force of truth, a quiet urgency that cut through the layers of fear and privilege. Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews, he reiterated, his voice, though still low, now imbued with a deep conviction. He wanted her to understand that her position, her royal status, offered no true sanctuary from the decree. If the Jews were to be annihilated, her identity, once revealed, would seal her fate as well. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. This was a stark warning, a reminder that inaction had its own terrible consequences. It was also a subtle suggestion of divine providence, that God's plan for deliverance would unfold regardless, but that her refusal might lead to her own destruction. And then, the most profound and challenging question, a question that echoed through the silent chambers of her heart, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? This was the crux of his appeal, a gentle but firm reminder of her unique position, her unlikely ascent to power, and the possibility that her entire life's journey had been orchestrated for this very moment, this singular, terrifying purpose. Esther received Mordecai's final message, the words settling upon her not as a burden, but as a profound truth. She sat in her chambers, the scent of the palace gardens drifting in through the open windows, the distant sounds of the city a muted hum. She looked at the copy of the decree, the official script now seeming to burn with an inner fire. The weight of Mordecai's words, particularly for such a time as this, resonated deep within her. It was a moment of profound realization, a quiet turning point. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now mingled with a growing sense of purpose, a quiet resolve. She understood that she could not, in good conscience, remain silent. Her life, her very existence, seemed to have been leading to this precipice. She sent Hathach back to Mordecai, this time with a message of unwavering determination, a quiet courage that had blossomed in the face of overwhelming fear. Her voice, though soft, carried a new strength, a quiet resolve. "Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Susa, and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Her words were a testament to her newfound resolve, a quiet acceptance of her fate, whatever it may be. The request for fasting was not merely a ritual, it was a desperate plea for divine intervention, a collective act of humility and supplication in the face of an impossible task. It was an acknowledgement that human effort alone might not be enough, that they needed a strength beyond their own. Mordecai, upon receiving Esther's message, felt a surge of profound relief and a quiet pride. He knew the immense courage it took for her to make such a decision, to face such a daunting risk. He immediately went about gathering the Jews in Susa, spreading the word of the fast. Throughout the Jewish quarter, the news spread quickly, carried by hushed voices and solemn nods. Homes that had been filled with despair now held a fragile, yet potent, sense of communal purpose. The sounds of daily life gave way to a quiet solemnity. The women prepared for the fast, covering their heads, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and hope. The men gathered in their synagogues, their prayers rising like a collective sigh towards the heavens. The children, sensing the gravity of the moment, moved with unusual quietness, their small hands clasped in imitation of their elders. For 3 days and 3 nights, the Jewish community in Susa entered a period of intense fasting and prayer, a collective act of spiritual preparation, their hopes and fears woven into a silent plea for their queen and for their very survival. The city, usually bustling, now held a deeper, more profound quietness in the Jewish quarter, a stillness born of collective anticipation and fervent prayer. Meanwhile, within the secluded walls of the palace, Esther and her young women also began their fast. The rich foods of the royal table remained untouched. The usual daily routines of beautification and adornment were set aside. Instead, there was a quiet solemnity in her chambers, a hushed atmosphere of introspection and prayer. The soft rustle of their simple garments, the gentle murmur of their whispered prayers, filled the air. The scent of the palace, usually a blend of exotic perfumes, now seemed to carry a faint, almost imperceptible, scent of their collective resolve, a quiet determination that permeated the very fabric of her being. The days passed slowly, each hour bringing her closer to the moment of truth, the moment she would step into the king's inner court, unsummoned, risking everything for her people. The silence in her chambers was not empty, it was filled with the weight of her decision, the echoes of Mordecai's words, and the silent prayers of her people. The sunlight, filtering through the high windows, seemed to fall with a softer, more reflective quality, illuminating the quiet strength that had taken root within her. After 3 days and 3 nights of fasting, a new dawn broke over Susa, painting the sky with its familiar hues of gold and rose. The air was still cool, carrying the familiar sense of the awakening city, but for Esther, this morning felt different. It was the morning of her decision, the day she would put her life on the line. She rose, her body perhaps weakened by the fast, but her spirit imbued with a quiet, unyielding strength. She chose her royal robes with care, not for vanity, but for purpose. She adorned herself in her royal apparel, selecting garments that would emphasize her regal bearing, her beauty, and her position as queen. Perhaps a gown of deep sapphire blue, the color of royalty, embroidered with threads of gold, its fabric shimmering softly in the morning light. Or perhaps a rich crimson, symbolizing power and authority, its heavy folds rustling gently as she moved. She would have chosen her finest jewels, not as adornment, but as symbols of her status, her crown perhaps, gleaming with precious stones, catching the light. Every detail was deliberate, designed to present herself not as a supplicant, but as a queen, a woman worthy of the king's attention and favor. With her attendants moving quietly around her, their faces reflecting a mixture of anxiety and admiration, Esther made her way through the long, echoing corridors of the palace. The sounds of her footsteps, usually soft, now seemed to resonate with a quiet determination. The air grew cooler as she approached the inner court, the heart of the king's domain, a place of immense power and potential peril. The massive doors, perhaps carved from cedar and inlaid with bronze, stood as silent sentinels, guarding the entrance to the king's presence. She paused for a moment, perhaps taking a deep, steadying breath, the scent of the palace's polished stone and ancient wood filling her senses. The light in the corridor was dim, contrasting with the bright light she knew would be streaming into the inner court from the open colonnades. Then, with a quiet resolve that belied the fear in her heart, she stepped into the inner court, directly opposite the king's hall. King Ahasuerus was seated on his royal throne, a magnificent seat of ivory and gold, perhaps adorned with precious gems, in the royal house. His gaze, often described as formidable, would have swept across the court, taking in the various officials and petitioners who were present. The air in the throne room would have been thick with the scent of incense, the low murmur of court business, and the subtle rustle of official robes. The light, streaming in from the open court, would have illuminated the rich tapestries on the walls, depicting scenes of royal hunts and battles, and glinted off the polished surfaces of the throne and the ornate weapons of the guards. As Esther entered, a hush fell over the court. All eyes turned to her, a queen appearing unsummoned, a breach of ancient protocol. The air crackled with unspoken tension. The king, seated high on his throne, would have seen her, a solitary figure of regal beauty and quiet determination, standing in the inner court. His expression would have been unreadable, his eyes perhaps narrowing slightly as he processed this unexpected appearance. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant, filled only with the soft rustle of her royal robes and the beating of her own heart. The fate of an entire people, and her own life, hung in that suspended moment, waiting for a single gesture, a single decision from the king. The golden scepter, a symbol of his absolute power and mercy, lay within his reach, gleaming softly in the filtered light, a silent arbiter of life and death. The air in the vast hall seemed to thicken, every breath held, every gaze fixed on the king and the queen, as the weight of the moment settled upon them, a quiet, almost unbearable pressure, as the world waited for the king's next move, a decision that would ripple through the vast empire and determine the very course of history, a truth about to be gently, slowly, brought into the light, as the world drifted deeper into the soft, unhurried embrace of the deep, velvet night, where shadows lengthened and softened across the ancient city of Susa, a city that had seen countless sunsets and sunrises, each one painting the sky with hues of memory and anticipation, as the cool desert air began its slow descent, bringing with it the faint, sweet scent of oleander and the distant, muffled calls of night birds settling into their nests among the palm fronds. The day's heat, which had shimmered over the sun-baked bricks and the polished marble of the palace, was now gently yielding to the quiet embrace of evening, and the bustling sounds of the marketplace, once a vibrant tapestry of voices and footsteps, were gradually fading into a hushed murmur, like the turning pages of a very old book. Inside the sprawling, magnificent palace, where the air was always cooler, scented with exotic spices and the subtle fragrance of cedar wood, the king, Ahasuerus, was perhaps still pondering the myriad details of his vast empire, or perhaps his thoughts had drifted to the recent, unsettling events that had stirred the quiet rhythms of his royal court. The memory of Vashti's defiance, a sharp, unexpected discord in the otherwise harmonious symphony of his reign, would have lingered like a faint, persistent echo in the grand, echoing halls of his mind, a reminder of the fragility of even the most absolute power. His counselors, those wise men of Persia and Media, whose faces were etched with the weight of years and the burden of counsel, had advised him to issue a decree, a pronouncement that would reverberate through all the 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia, a decree intended to reassert the king's authority, to ensure that every man was master in his own house, a simple, yet profound, order that aimed to restore a perceived balance in the social fabric of the empire. This decree, written in the script of each province and proclaimed in the language of each people, would have been dispatched by swift couriers on horseback, their hooves thundering across the ancient roads, carrying the king's word to the farthest reaches of his dominion, a word that would settle like dust upon the lives of millions, shaping their daily interactions and their understanding of power. Now, with the matter of Vashti ostensibly resolved, a new quiet had descended upon the royal household, a quiet that was both a relief and a subtle, underlying tension, for the king, despite his immense power, was still a man, and perhaps, in the deep solitude of his chambers, he felt the absence of a queen, a companion to share the quiet moments of reflection that even a king must experience. The vastness of his palace, with its intricate carvings and its shimmering tapestries, could sometimes feel empty, and the weight of his crown, though adorned with precious jewels, could be a heavy burden to bear alone. So, it was in this atmosphere of quiet contemplation, perhaps under the soft glow of oil lamps that cast long, dancing shadows upon the walls, that his young men, his attendants, those who served close to his person, would have approached him with a new suggestion, a gentle proposal to fill the void that Vashti had left. They spoke of gathering all the beautiful young virgins throughout the provinces, bringing them to the citadel of Susa, into the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was the keeper of the women. This was not an uncommon practice in the ancient Near East, where royal courts often sought to replenish their ranks of concubines and potential queens from among the fairest of the land. The idea would have been presented as a practical solution, a way to ensure the king's comfort and the continuity of the royal line, cloaked in the language of duty and tradition. The king, perhaps weary of the recent turmoil, or simply amenable to a suggestion that promised a return to order and beauty, found the proposal pleasing. And so, the decree went forth, another ripple spreading across the empire, calling for a grand assembly of beauty, a procession of young women from every corner of the vast Persian realm, each one a potential queen, each one stepping into an unknown future. Imagine the scene in those distant provinces, the news arriving on the dusty hooves of a royal messenger, a scroll unrolled, its words read aloud in the village square. The initial murmur of curiosity would have given way to a mixture of excitement and apprehension. For some families, it would have been an honor, a chance for their daughter to ascend to unimaginable heights, to leave a life of luxury within the gilded walls of the palace. For others, it would have been a wrenching separation, a daughter taken from the familiar comforts of home, from the warmth of her family, to enter a world of unknown expectations and strict protocols. The young women themselves, ranging in age and temperament, would have felt a swirl of emotions, fear of the unknown, hope for a better life, perhaps a quiet sadness at leaving behind everything they had ever known. They would have been prepared for their journey, their hair carefully braided, their finest garments chosen, their eyes wide with a mix of wonder and trepidation as they embarked on the long journey to Susa. Among these young women, from the Jewish community residing in Susa, was a girl named Hadassah, a name that whispered of myrtle, a plant known for its fragrant leaves and delicate white flowers, a symbol of beauty and peace. But she was more commonly known by her Persian name, Esther, meaning a star, a name that seemed to anticipate the quiet brilliance she would one day possess. Esther was an orphan, a girl whose parents had passed away, leaving her in the care of her older cousin, Mordecai. Mordecai was a man of quiet dignity and deep faith, a descendant of Kish, a Benjamite, whose family had been carried away from Jerusalem with Jeconiah, king of Judah, during the Babylonian exile. This historical detail is important, for it places Esther and Mordecai firmly within the context of a people who had endured displacement and captivity, a people who carried the weight of their history and the hope of their future within their hearts. They were part of a diaspora community, living in a foreign land, yet holding fast to their traditions and their identity, a quiet resilience that would prove to be a profound strength. Mordecai had raised Esther as his own daughter, providing her with the love and guidance that only a devoted guardian could offer. He had instilled in her a deep sense of her heritage, teaching her the stories of their people, the laws of their God, and the importance of integrity and quiet wisdom. Esther, in turn, was described as having a beautiful figure and a lovely appearance, but her true beauty, perhaps, lay deeper, in her gentle spirit and her capacity for quiet observation. When the king's command was proclaimed, and many young women were gathered from all the provinces, Esther, too, was taken to the king's palace, to the custody of Hegai. This would have been a moment of profound uncertainty for both Esther and Mordecai. The separation would have been difficult, a silent farewell filled with unspoken anxieties and hopes. Mordecai, ever the protective guardian, would have given her careful instructions, perhaps whispering words of caution and encouragement, reminding her to remember who she was, even in the midst of a foreign court. he specifically instructed her not to reveal her people or her kindred, a piece of advice born of wisdom and perhaps a deep understanding of the potential prejudices that existed within the Persian Empire. The Jewish people, though allowed to leave and practice their faith, were often viewed with a degree of suspicion by some elements of the ruling class, and Mordecai's counsel was a pragmatic measure to protect Esther in an unfamiliar and potentially hostile environment. So, Esther, along with many other young women, entered the king's harem, a world of opulent confinement, a place of silk and perfumes, but also of strict rules and unspoken rivalries. Hegai, the king's eunuch, a man whose life was dedicated to the meticulous care of the royal women, would have overseen their every need. His role was not merely that of a caretaker, but also a gatekeeper, a discerning judge of character and demeanor, for he was responsible for presenting the women to the king. Hegai found favor with Esther, perhaps drawn to her quiet grace and her gentle disposition. She pleased him, and he hastened to provide her with her cosmetics and her portions of food, and with 7 choice maids from the king's palace, and he transferred her and her maids to the best place in the harem. This preferential treatment was a subtle indication of Esther's innate charm and her ability to navigate the complex social dynamics of the palace with quiet dignity. The preparation for meeting the king was an elaborate and lengthy process, a ritual designed to enhance the natural beauty of each woman and to ensure her readiness for the royal presence. It lasted for 12 months, a full year dedicated to beauty treatments and refinement. 6 months were spent with oil of myrrh, a rich, aromatic resin known for its purifying and softening properties, believed to cleanse the skin and impart a subtle, lasting fragrance. Imagine the daily ritual, the gentle application of the thick, dark oil, its earthy, slightly bitter scent filling the air. A skilled attendant massaged it into the skin, leaving it feeling supple and smooth. The remaining 6 months were spent with spices and cosmetics for women, a vast array of fragrant powders, oils, and ointments, each one carefully chosen to enhance complexion, soften hair, and add a delicate perfume. This was not merely about superficial beauty, it was about preparing the women to embody an ideal of royal elegance and allure, a transformation from their provincial origins to the refined standards of the Persian court. During this time, Esther, like the others, would have learned the intricate etiquette of the palace, the subtle gestures, the respectful demeanor, the art of quiet conversation, all designed to make her a suitable companion for the most powerful man in the empire. All this while, Mordecai, her devoted cousin, would walk daily in front of the court of the women's house, a silent, watchful presence. He would have paced slowly, his gaze perhaps fixed on the high walls, his heart heavy with concern, yet also filled with a quiet hope. He longed to know how Esther was and what was happening to her, for he could not enter the women's quarters. His daily vigil was a testament to his unwavering love and his deep sense of responsibility, a silent prayer offered in the dusty courtyard, a constant reminder that she was not alone, even in the midst of her grand, isolating circumstances. He was her anchor, her connection to her past, to her people, and to the quiet strength of her faith. When the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after the completion of her 12 months of preparation, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. This could have been a choice of garments, jewels, or personal adornments, a final touch of individuality before presenting herself to the king. It was a moment of profound significance, a threshold crossed, from the communal preparation of the harem to the singular, intimate encounter with the monarch. Some women might have chosen lavish jewels, hoping to impress with their splendor. Others might have opted for garments of the finest silk, their colors shimmering in the lamplight. Each choice would have reflected their personality, their hopes, and their understanding of what might please the king. And so the story rests here for now. Thank you for spending this time with Easy Drift Sleep. If these stories help you find rest, a quick subscribe means a new one is always waiting for you. Sleep well. We will see you next time.